Chapter 5: Learning How to Think. Before Aristotle became a name attached to systems, commentaries, and medieval university syllabi, he was a man trying to solve a very old human problem. How do you know when a thought has truly followed from another thought? Picture a young student in Plato's academy, listening to arguments rise and turn under the plane trees. A question is asked. Someone offers an answer. Socrates, though long dead, still haunts the method. Define your terms, test the claim, follow the consequences. The air is full of beautiful danger, because a careless word can undo an entire position. Aristotle learned there that philosophy is not only vision. It is discipline. The mind must be trained to move from premise to conclusion, without smuggling in what it wants to prove. His logical writings, later gathered under the title organon, meaning tool or instrument, grew from that discipline. They are not glamorous in the way the ethics or the politics can be glamorous. They do not offer a picture of the noble life or the best city. They offer something more austere, the craft of valid reasoning. And yet this craft matters everywhere. If you cannot tell a sound argument from a seductive one, ethics becomes moral decoration, politics becomes noise, and science becomes a pile of impressions. The first Aristotle of logic is the great architect of the syllogism. He takes ordinary statements and shows how their structure can compel a conclusion. All human beings are mortal. Socrates is a human being. Therefore Socrates is mortal. The example is later, but the form is Aristotelian in spirit. 3 terms, 2 premises, 1 conclusion, necessity clicking into place like a well-made latch. This may seem simple until we remember what Aristotle achieved. Before symbolic logic, before truth tables, before modern notation, he mapped patterns of inference with astonishing care. He distinguished universal from particular statements, affirmative from negative ones, all know some not. He studied how propositions oppose one another. He analyzed the role of the middle term, the bridge that lets the mind move from one claim to another. In a valid syllogism, the conclusion does not merely sound plausible. It must follow, provided the premises are true. There is a kind of moral beauty in that. A good syllogism does not flatter, threaten, seduce, or shout. It stands there bare and inspectable. If the terms are clear and the premise is granted, the conclusion arrives not by force but by form. Aristotle had found a way to make reasoning public. Anyone trained in the craft could examine the steps. The mind no longer had to rely only on brilliance or charisma. Argument could be taught. But Aristotle was never only a maker of formal tools. He was also the collector of animals, the analyst of constitutions, the watcher of tragic plots, the tutor moving between Macedonian power and Greek civic life. The more of the world he tried to understand, the more pressure the world placed on his logical instrument. Reality does not always present itself as neat subject and predicate. Many things are usually but not always true. Some things are possible without being actual. Some are necessary in one respect and contingent in another. Some conclusions depend not simply on what is the case, but on what would be the case if something else were granted. So the story of Aristotle's logic is not a story of early error and later correction. It is the story of a tool being tested against rougher material. The clean light of the syllogism remains, but around it gather shadows, conditions, future events, scientific demonstrations, and the complicated grammar of what may or must be. In the categories, Aristotle gives one of his basic starting points. Things can be spoken of in different ways. We say what something is, a human being, a horse. We say how much, 3 cubits long. We say what kind, pale, literate, brave. We speak of relation, place, time, position, condition, action, being acted upon. This may look like a list, but it is really a training in attention. Language is not a smooth surface. It has joints. If we confuse one kind of predication with another, we begin to reason badly. The early logical works have this spare, sorting energy. They want to classify statements, mark their relations, and determine which forms of inference are valid. Aristotle's world is still full of substances, forms, causes, and purposes, but the logical focus narrows to the shape of propositions. All A are B's. No B are C. Some A are not C. What follows? What cannot follow? Where has the argument slipped? The achievement is immense, but its limits are visible. Consider the sentence, every healthy animal digests food. That seems simple. But what about an animal that is asleep, sick, young, malformed, or in a condition where it can digest but is not digesting now? What about a statement in biology that is true for the most part, as Aristotle often says, but not without exception? What about politics, where a middle class usually stabilizes a city, but particular histories complicate the rule? What about ethics, where courage is always a virtue, but the brave act cannot be identified by a single outward behavior? Aristotle knew these pressures because he generated them himself. His philosophy kept widening. Logic had to serve knowledge, not merely display elegance. That is why the posterior analytics is so important. There Aristotle asks not just, when is an inference valid, but what is scientific knowledge? To know scientifically is not merely to know that something is so. It is to know why it is so. Demonstration must reveal the cause. This is a decisive expansion. A syllogism can be valid and still scientifically shallow. Suppose we say, planets do not twinkle, what does not twinkle is near, therefore planets are near. Even if the inference has a form, the explanation may be wrong or incomplete. Demonstration worthy of science must connect the conclusion to the real reason. Aristotle wants knowledge to have depth. He wants the middle term in a scientific syllogism, not merely to link words, but to disclose the cause by which the fact is true. Here logic reaches toward metaphysics and natural science. The formal structure of reasoning is not abandoned, it is embedded in a larger account of explanation. To know an eclipse is not merely to know that the moon is darkened. It is to know the cause, the earth blocking the sun's light. A child may see the shadow. A scientist knows why the shadow occurs. Logic becomes the skeleton of explanation, but explanation needs flesh, causes, natures, and the order of reality. Then comes modality, the language of necessity, possibility, impossibility, and contingency. This is where Aristotle's logical landscape grows more difficult and more interesting. Some things are necessary. If all humans are animals and all animals are living beings, then all humans are living beings. Some things are impossible, a square circle, a number both odd and not odd in the same respect. Some things are possible but not actual. The acorn may become an oak, the student may become a musician, the city may fall into faction or remain stable. Some things happen for the most part, not always. A logic that knows only flat actuality cannot do justice to such a world. Aristotle's own metaphysics gives him the language of potentiality and actuality, and his logic has to make room for it. What follows from possibly? What follows from necessarily? If something is necessary, is it also possible? If something is possible, does that mean it might be otherwise? These questions are not word games. They matter because nature itself is a field of powers becoming actual under conditions. A seed is not a tiny tree, but neither is it just a speck of matter. It is a living possibility with a direction. One famous passage in On Interpretation makes the issue unforgettable: the sea battle tomorrow. If someone says today, there will be a sea battle tomorrow, and someone else says, there will not be a sea battle tomorrow, must one statement already be true and the other false? If yes, does that mean the future is fixed, that the battle must happen or must not happen? Aristotle wants to preserve a distinction between truth and necessity. The future contingent event is not settled in the way past events are settled. Otherwise, deliberation would become theatre. Why plan, choose, warn, or command if everything true about tomorrow were already necessary today? The sea battle matters because Aristotle's philosophy cares deeply about action. Ethics depends on the possibility that human beings can deliberate among alternatives. Politics depends on citizens and rulers making choices. Biology depends on natural tendencies that usually reach an end but can be blocked or distorted. If logic made every future tense statement necessary simply because it will eventually be true or false, it would flatten the living world into a frozen diagram. This is one of the places where Aristotle's thought grows more supple. He does not throw away the law that contradictory statements cannot both be true in the same respect at the same time. He is not surrendering to vagueness. He is asking how logic should speak when time, possibility, and action enter the room. The answer is not always neat. Later commentators would argue fiercely about what he meant. But the pressure itself is revealing. Aristotle's logic is being stretched by his refusal to simplify reality for the convenience of theory. Something similar happens with hypothetical reasoning. Much of ordinary and scientific thought proceeds by conditions. If this is so, then that follows. If the fever rises, the disease has taken a turn. If the city arms the poor without reforming the laws, faction may follow. If the tragic hero acts in ignorance, recognition may transform the action. Aristotle did not develop a full modern propositional logic, and later Stoic thinkers would do much more with conditionals. Still, his work on demonstration, dialectic, and reasoning from assumptions shows a mind aware that inquiry often moves through hypotheses. Dialectic itself is part of the story. In the Topics, Aristotle studies arguments from reputable opinions, endoxa, the views accepted by the many or the wise. This is not scientific demonstration from first principles. It is the art of testing, probing, clarifying, and arguing where certainty is not yet available. Dialectic belongs to philosophy because human beings often begin in what seems credible before they reach what is known. It is a bridge between conversation and science. This gives Aristotle's logic a human texture. In one register, he wants strict demonstration. In another, he recognizes debate, probability, and the gradual refinement of opinion. A doctor, a statesman, a teacher, and a judge rarely begin with perfect first principles shining in the hand. They begin with symptoms, customs, testimony, appearances, and inherited beliefs. They ask better questions. They distinguish. They test. Logic, in this broader sense, is not only a machine for conclusions. It is a discipline of intellectual honesty. The supposed discrepancy between Aristotle's early and later logic is therefore better understood as a deepening. The early syllogistic gives him the grammar of necessity. The later concerns ask how that grammar works in sciences whose objects change, in human affairs where choice matters, and in a world where potentiality is as real as actuality. He moves from the classroom exercise to the living inquiry, from the clean diagram to the field station, the law court, the sick room, the assembly. This does not mean everything fits perfectly. Aristotle's modal syllogistic is notoriously hard. Even specialists disagree about parts of it. Some arguments seem strained, some classifications seem tied to assumptions we no longer share. His ambition outran the tools available to him, and later logic would revise, replace, and extend his work. The Stoics, medieval logicians, and modern symbolic logicians would each find things Aristotle had not formalized. To honor him honestly is not to pretend he completed logic forever. Yet it is also unfair to measure him only by what came later. Aristotle created the first great systematic account of valid inference in the Western tradition. For centuries, students learned to reason by entering the house he built. Even when modern logic moved beyond syllogisms, it did so in part because he had made reasoning itself an object of rigorous study. The more interesting truth is that Aristotle's logic mirrors Aristotle's whole mind. He begins by distinguishing. He asks what kind of thing we are dealing with. He looks for causes and principles. He trusts form, but he does not want empty form. He wants thought to answer to being. The world is intelligible, but not always simple. Knowledge requires both sharp boundaries and patient adjustment. This is why the development of his logic has a strangely ethical feel. To reason well, for Aristotle, is to practice a virtue of the intellect. It requires steadiness, humility before the subject matter, and resistance to shortcuts. The rash thinker leaps to conclusions. The cowardly thinker refuses to conclude at all. The good thinker, like the practically wise person in ethics, finds the right firmness in the right place. He demands necessity where necessity is available. He accepts contingency where the matter can be otherwise. He uses dialectic when inquiry is beginning and demonstration when causes are known. There is a lesson here for anyone who has ever wanted one method to solve every problem. Aristotle's early logic tempts us with the dream of a perfect instrument: define the terms, arrange the premises, draw the conclusion. His later logical concerns remind us that instruments meet different materials. Wood is not marble. Politics is not geometry. Biology is not arithmetic. Ethics is not a courtroom proof. Each field has its own precision, and the wise thinker does not demand more exactness than the subject allows. That last point is one of Aristotle's most enduring gifts. It is the mark of an educated mind, he says in the Ethics, to look for precision in each class of things only so far as the nature of the subject permits. The sentence could stand over his logic as a whole. The syllogism gives precision where form can carry it. Modal and scientific reasoning ask what precision means when dealing with possibility, cause, and change. Dialectic teaches us how to move when certainty has not yet arrived. So the portrait is not of two Aristotles, one rigid and one flexible. It is of one thinker learning the range of his own instrument. The young logician hears the clean note of necessity. The mature investigator hears harmonies and dissonances, the possible, the probable, the conditional, the causal, the future not yet fixed. He keeps the early discipline, but refuses to let it become a prison. In the end, Aristotle's logic is not merely about arguments. It is about responsibility in thought. Before we persuade, we should know whether our reasons hold. Before we claim knowledge, we should know whether we have found the cause. Before we speak about what must happen, we should ask whether it may yet be otherwise. The Lyceum's walking teacher is still useful here, patient, exacting, sometimes wrong, often brilliant, always asking the mind to move carefully from what it says to what it is entitled to know.